When my kid first came along, I knew I wanted to do things differently. I didn't know exactly how, but I knew I wanted to do things differently. Because when I was young, the way my dad parented me was very punitive and very painful. I ended up acting out for years and years and years. I had a very difficult teen years in the early 20s, lots of violence and crime, and hanging out with dangerous people, all kind of like a rebellion against my dad. Not my mom as much, but her too, but mostly my dad. My mom tried to do things differently. You know, she broke a lot of the cycles from her past, a lot of the patterns from her past, and passed that cycle-breaking mindset on to me, because she treated my sister and I very different from how her parents treated her. And she really tried. And she was also stuck in a situation where she didn't have a lot of choices. But it was really hard for her because she didn't have a lot of power. She didn't have a lot of freedom. She was in a difficult marriage. It was all very difficult. But even with that, she did her best to break the pattern. And so but still, because my dad, and then getting bullied at school and different things, I ended up acting out quite a bit. And then when my kid came along, I did not want them to go through that. So I was like, I'm going to do the opposite of my dad. That was my basic. I'm going to rebel against everything, because I was still in my rebellious phase. I'm going to rebel against everything traditional parenting, and I'm going to not be like my dad. That's how I started. But I knew I didn't want to yell, and I knew I didn't want to punish, and I knew I didn't want to hold authority over my kid and do the firm but kind thing, and like impose my will on them. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to have a deep, non-hierarchical relationship. I didn't exactly know how to do that. I wanted to support their development. I didn't exactly know how to do that. And there was no internet. 1997, there was no internet. I didn't know there was anybody else doing this. Now I know there was a few people out there thinking similarly. But then I didn't know. And so when my kid came along, I had no idea that I had repressed emotional triggers. I was 25. I didn't know. 28. I didn't know that was a thing. I didn't know that I had wounds inside. I didn't know that I would have responses and emotional reactions beyond my control. I didn't know. And so suddenly my kid is there, and I find myself screaming and yelling at her. I find myself angry all the time. I find myself losing control. And it's terrible, and it makes me feel terrible. And what the saying that I came up with in the early years is, my ideology is clashing with my reality. And people would laugh when I would say that, and then they would say, oh, so you're giving up on your ideology, are you? You realize it's too hard, because everybody knew I was trying something different. And I said, no, I'm not giving up on the philosophy. I'm just acknowledging that it's really freaking hard. And it actually makes me want to work harder, because I realize there's a lot more going on than I had any idea. My ideology is clashing with my reality. If you think of the iceberg that I am, and I always talk about iceberg consciousness. So we're icebergs too, not just our kids, right? So if I have just the top of the iceberg, but underneath there's so much going on, right? And I didn't really realize that. So a lot of it came out in ways that I had no idea. And it was like, Vivek, you have to heal. You have to change these patterns, or you're going to keep yelling at your kid and it's just going to keep getting worse. And that's what sent me on this journey of discovery, which has led to so much of the work that I do, so much of what I teach, and I just love it. But it started in chaos. So if you're in chaos right now, it doesn't mean you're stuck there. It's part of changing patterns. You're changing ancient patterns, and deeply embedded into society and deeply embedded into our cultural DNA. And so it's hard to press up against that. It's hard to do the opposite of that. And you get ridiculed and you feel alone, and then you yell at your kids and you feel terrible. We used to joke all the time. We'd say, oh, there's something else for her to talk about in therapy. Because there's no way to get out of this parenting thing without damaging your kids somewhat. All we can do is try and minimize it. And when I realized my ideology is clashing with my reality, I realized I had to do a lot of work on myself. And I'm still doing that work on myself. It never ends. And one place you can find out some good information about that is my free course called Guiding Without Controlling, which you can find at meaningfulideas.com. I also have a paid course there called Recovering from a Parenting Mistake, which really helps propel us forward when we make a mistake, so that we can learn the most from it and have very little shame, so that we don't burden ourselves with the shame of it. And then we become good models for our kids too. And I go into a lot of detail about that. And then please follow me on all the spaces at Meaningful Ideas, on Twitter and TikTok, YouTube, Instagram and Facebook. And that's it, everybody. Peace out.